The galaxy had fallen into darkness. The Vaknar, an advanced alien race, ruled with an iron fist. Entire planets lay in ruins, reduced to smoking wastelands, and those who survived were nothing more than slaves, living in fear of their alien overlords. The Vaknar had no mercy. They conquered every corner of the galaxy, crushing rebellions without hesitation. The enslaved species whispered stories of an ancient race, humans, who once stood up to the Vaknar long ago. But that was just a myth, a legend the Vaknar laughed at. Humanity, they said, had vanished. They were nothing more than a forgotten footnote in history. For centuries, the Vaknar spread terror across the stars, believing they had wiped out any threat. They ruled with arrogance, their technology far superior to anything the galaxy had ever seen. To them, the idea of humans rising again was absurd. Humans had tried to fight once before and failed miserably. To the Vaknar, that was the end of the story. But deep in a distant, forgotten system, a vault lay hidden beneath layers of rock and dust, untouched for centuries. Inside this vault were rows upon rows of cryopods, each one containing a human, frozen in time, waiting. The world outside had moved on, but inside the vault, humanity slept, unaware of the devastation the Vaknar had caused in their absence. Then something changed. A silent signal echoed through the vault, activating the systems that had lain dormant for centuries. One by one, the lights on the cryopods flickered to life, hissing as the frost that had kept the humans in stasis began to melt. Inside the pods, the humans stirred. Their hearts, which had been still for so long, began to beat again. Their eyes, sealed shut for hundreds of years, slowly opened. The first to wake was Captain Marcus Kane. As the pod's glass cover slid open, he gasped for air, his body shaking as it adjusted to life once more. Disoriented and confused, he looked around at the rows of pods surrounding him, each one containing a fellow soldier. His mind raced. How long had they been asleep? What had happened to the world they once knew? Kane stumbled out of the pod, grabbing his head as flashes of memories flooded back. War, chaos, the decision to go into cryo sleep as a last-ditch effort to save humanity. He remembered the looming threat of alien forces, but nothing like what he would soon discover. The ship's systems slowly came online, data scrolling across the screens in front of him. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The Vaknar had risen to power during their long sleep. Entire civilizations had fallen, and the galaxy was now under the heel of a single oppressive empire. Kane's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. Humanity hadn't just disappeared. They had been completely forgotten. No one even knew they were still out there, waiting for the moment they would rise again. That moment had arrived. As Kane's fellow soldiers began to wake, the weight of their task hit them all at once. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were the last hope for humanity, and perhaps for the entire galaxy. Kane knew they couldn't face the Vaknar head-on. The enemy was far too powerful, and their numbers too great. But they had something the Vaknar didn't: tactical brilliance, human ingenuity, and a will to survive. Kane rallied his soldiers, laying out the grim truth. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they still had one advantage. The Vaknar didn't know they existed. For now, they were ghosts, and that was their greatest weapon. As the humans began to stir inside the vault, their senses were overwhelmed by a flood of sensations. The air was cold, sterile, and unfamiliar. Their limbs felt heavy, stiff from centuries of immobility. They gasped for breath, their lungs struggling to adjust after being frozen in time for so long. Their minds raced, a blur of fragmented memories and confusion. What had happened? Where were they? How much time had passed? Fear surged through their bodies as they tried to make sense of their surroundings. Captain Marcus Kane, a seasoned leader, was the first to regain his composure. His sharp instincts kicked in, pushing aside the disorientation. He quickly scanned the room, taking in the sight of his comrades still groggily emerging from their cryopods. They all looked as bewildered as he felt, but Kane knew there was no time to waste. Something was wrong. This was not the world they had known before they went into cryo sleep. Kane's mind worked fast, piecing together the fragments of information he had. The last thing he remembered was the war. Humanity had been losing, badly. They had made the desperate decision to go into stasis, a gamble for the future, hoping that one day they would wake to a better world. But as the humans around him blinked and stretched, Kane could feel it in his gut. Things had not gotten better. He approached the main control console, trying to pull up any data that could explain what had happened while they slept. His fingers flew across the screen as ancient systems groaned back to life. His heart sank as the information came through. The galaxy had fallen under the control of a new enemy, the Vacanar. Entire star systems had been conquered, civilizations crushed, and humanity had been forgotten. They had slept through centuries of devastation. Kane felt a cold sweat on his forehead. They were vastly outnumbered, their technology outdated compared to what he could see from the new scans. The Vacanar had evolved into a force more powerful than anything humanity had ever faced. Kane clenched his fists, knowing that their awakening had come at the worst possible time. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something strange. On the ship's scanners, an unknown vessel appeared, a cloaked ship hovering silently nearby. It had been there all along, watching them. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized this ship wasn't human, but it wasn't Vacanar either. It was something else, something mysterious. Encrypted signals from the cloaked ship began streaming into the vault system, their purpose unclear. Was it a threat? Was it there to help, or to wipe them out before they could even begin to regroup? Kane's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. They were vulnerable, disoriented, and had no idea what they were up against. The other humans, now fully awake, gathered around Kane, waiting for his command. Tension filled the air as they too noticed the mysterious ship. Whispers of unease spread among them. Kane kept his eyes locked on the signals, his mind racing with possibilities. Friend or foe, this ship could be their first contact with whatever this new galaxy had become. The uncertainty hung over them like a shadow, and Kane knew one thing for certain. They were no longer alone. The audience would feel the weight of this moment, the uncertainty and tension building as they waited to see how the humans would handle this unknown force. Suspense gripped the room, leaving everyone eager to discover the ship's true intentions. Would it be an ally, or would it be their first battle in a war they hadn't even begun to fight? The humans had only just awakened, but the galaxy was already closing in. As Marcus Kane dug deeper into the vault systems, the full scope of the Vacanar's dominance became clear. It was worse than he had feared. The Vacanar Empire hadn't just spread across the galaxy. It had completely consumed it. Planet after planet had fallen under their control, each one subjected to ruthless rule. The Vacanar's advanced technology made them unstoppable, and there was no one left to challenge their power. Entire civilizations had been wiped out or enslaved, and for centuries, no one had dared to rise against them. Humanity, once a force to be reckoned with, was now little more than a ghost story. Marcus knew that if they waited too long, they would be crushed before they even had a chance to fight back. They had just woken up, still disoriented, and out of touch with the galaxy around them. But Marcus understood one thing: they had to act quickly. The Vacanar had no idea the humans were still alive. That was their only advantage, and they couldn't afford to waste it. Striking first was their best and only option, even if it seemed like a long shot. Marcus called his small team together. Their numbers were few, and their technology was outdated compared to what the Vacanar had at their disposal. The Cryo Vault had been designed for long-term survival, not for battle, so the weapons and equipment they had were relics of a time long past. But Marcus had faith in his people. Humanity had always thrived not because of superior technology, but because of their ingenuity, their resilience, and their ability to adapt in the face of impossible odds. The humans worked quickly, retrofitting what little they had left. Old cloaking devices were patched up and brought back to life, providing them with a slim chance to move undetected. The exosuits, though ancient, were modified to enhance their strength and speed. AI companions, some of the last remnants of the old human fleet, were reactivated and given new directives. They were fighting a losing battle from the start, but Marcus knew they had to try. Among the soldiers was Bonner, a young man who had been Marcus's closest friend before the long sleep. Bonner was fiercely loyal to Marcus, always ready to follow his lead without question. But as they prepared for their first strike, it was clear that Bonner was shaken. The galaxy they had woken up to was a far cry from the one they had left behind. It was brutal, unrecognizable. Fear crept into his eyes as he adjusted his armor, his hands trembling slightly. He had always been brave, but the uncertainty of this new world was overwhelming. Bonner pulled Marcus aside, his voice low. "What if this is it?" he asked. "What if we're too late? We don't even know what we're fighting anymore." Marcus placed a hand on Bonner's shoulder, steadying him. "We might not know everything, but we know enough," he said. "The Vacnar don't think we exist. That's our advantage. And we're going to show them that humans don't go down without a fight." Bonner nodded, though the fear hadn't left his eyes. Still, he followed Marcus's orders without hesitation, his loyalty unwavering. He might have been afraid, but he wasn't about to let that stop him from doing what needed to be done. The tension in the group was palpable as they prepared for the attack. They knew the risks. The Vacnar's technology was far beyond anything they had ever seen, and they were vastly outnumbered. But the humans had something the Vacnar didn't expect: strategy. The Vacnar were arrogant, overconfident in their superiority. Marcus planned to use that arrogance against them. Their first target was a small Vacnar outpost on the edge of a distant system, far enough from the main empire that it wouldn't draw immediate attention. The plan was simple: sneak in, disable their communications, and strike hard and fast before the Vacnar even knew what hit them. The humans' cloaked ships drifted through the dark void of space, nearly invisible as they approached their target. Bonner sat quietly in the cockpit, his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of facing the Vacnar for the first time terrified him, but there was no turning back now. This was it. The humans launched their attack under the cover of darkness, their cloaked ships slipping through space like shadows. The Vacnar outpost below seemed oblivious, its defenses minimal, its soldiers relaxed. They had no idea that a human strike team was closing in on them. Marcus had chosen this target carefully. It was isolated, far from the heart of the Empire, and the Vacnar, arrogant as ever, believed no one would dare challenge them here. That arrogance would be their downfall. As their ships descended toward the outpost, the silence was shattered by the first blast. An orbital bombardment lit up the sky, a blinding explosion that took out one of the main defense towers. The Vacnar scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden attack. Marcus and his team moved quickly, their exosuits allowing them to leap across the terrain with unnatural speed. They moved like ghosts, striking hard and fast before the Vacnar could react. The battle was chaos. Explosions rocked the ground as the humans unleashed everything they had. A-drones, small but deadly, darted through the air, targeting weak points in the Vacnar defenses. They swarmed over the outpost, disabling shields and communications before the Vacnar could even call for reinforcements. The humans were outnumbered, but their stealth and cunning gave them the edge. Marcus led the charge, his combat instincts sharp as ever. His exosuit hummed with power, boosting his movements as he fought his way through the Vacnar soldiers. These aliens were powerful, their armor thick, and their weapons deadly, but they weren't prepared for this kind of fight. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, not dealing with a small, highly skilled group of guerrilla fighters. Marcus took full advantage of their confusion, striking from the shadows and disappearing before they could regroup. Bonner, still terrified but determined, fought at Marcus's side. His heart pounded in his chest as he fired his weapon, the shock of battle unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Vacnar were larger and stronger, their weapons far more advanced, but Bonner's fear began to fade as adrenaline took over. His training kicked in, and he found himself moving with precision, following Marcus's lead. The sky above them was filled with fire as orbital bombardments continued to rain down, creating massive craters in the landscape. The air was thick with smoke and debris, and the roar of combat was deafening. Every moment felt like it could be their last, but the humans pressed on, using their small numbers to slip through the chaos. In the midst of the battle, disaster struck. A Vacnar soldier, towering and heavily armored, lunged at Marcus, knocking him to the ground. The alien raised its weapon, ready to deliver a killing blow. For a split second, Marcus was helpless, the weight of the Vacnar soldier pinning him down. Time seemed to slow as the weapon charged, glowing with deadly energy. But before the strike could land, Bonner acted. Without thinking, he threw himself at the Vacnar, his exosuit propelling him forward with blinding speed. He tackled the alien, knocking it off balance and away from Marcus. The two crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, Bonner's heart racing as he fought to keep the alien from overpowering him. The Vacnar snarled, its strength overwhelming, but Bonner refused to give in. He was fighting not just for himself, but for humanity's survival. With a final burst of strength, Bonner managed to get his weapon in place and fired, the blast piercing through the Vacnar's armor. The alien collapsed, defeated, and Bonner staggered to his feet, breathing hard. He looked over at Marcus, who was already back on his feet, eyes wide with a mix of relief and pride. "Nice save, Bonner," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. Bonner gave a shaky nod, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had faced death and lived. More importantly, he had saved Marcus, the man he looked up to more than anyone else. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. The Vacnar, caught off guard and disorganized, couldn't withstand the human assault. One by one, their defenses fell, and the humans pushed forward, relentless. With every explosion, every strike, the Vacnar's overconfidence crumbled. This outpost, once thought to be untouchable, was falling to a force they had never expected. Humans who had been asleep for centuries, but were now awake and fighting harder than ever. As the last Vacnar soldier fell, the humans stood victorious, battered but unbroken. This was just the beginning, but it was a victory that proved one thing: humanity was back, and they weren't going down without a fight. The battle was over, but the cost was painfully clear. The ground was littered with debris and fallen Vacnar soldiers, and the air still smelled of smoke and burning metal. As the dust began to settle, Marcus felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. They had won their first fight, but it didn't feel like a victory, not with what came next. Marcus's heart sank when he saw Bonner lying on the ground, motionless. He rushed over, dropping to his knees beside his friend. Bonner's face was pale, his breath shallow and ragged. Blood seeped through the cracks of his exosuit, a fatal wound tearing through his side. Marcus knew immediately that Bonner wouldn't make it. "Bonner," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He gently lifted Bonner's head, cradling it in his arms. The battlefield around them seemed to fade, the noise of victory replaced by a heavy silence. For a moment, it was just the two of them, surrounded by the aftermath of the fight. Bonner's eyes flickered open, struggling to focus. He looked up at Marcus, the pain clear on his face, but there was something else too. Fear, not just of dying, but of leaving this world behind, this strange new galaxy he had barely begun to understand. Bonner had fought bravely, but now, at the end, he was just a young soldier afraid of what came next. "I don't want to go like this, Marcus," Bonner said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not here. Not now." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He didn't know what to say. He had always been the strong one, the leader, but in this moment, he felt powerless. How could he ease the fear of someone facing death, someone he had known for so long? someone who had just saved his life. "You're not dying for nothing, Bonner," Marcus finally said, his voice steady despite the pain in his chest. "You saved me. You saved all of us. And because of you, we're going to keep fighting. We're going to make sure humanity survives." Bonner's lips trembled into a faint smile, though the effort seemed to take everything he had left. "We'll win this, right?" he asked, his voice faint, fading. Marcus nodded, forcing himself to stay strong for his friend. "We will. I promise." As the light began to fade from Bonner's eyes, Marcus held him tighter. Bonner's breath came slower, each one more labored than the last. And then, with one final, shallow breath, Bonner was gone. Marcus sat there, frozen in place, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had lost comrades before, but this was different. Bonner wasn't just another soldier, he was family. And now he was gone. Another casualty in a war that seemed endless. The other soldiers gathered around, standing in solemn silence. They had seen it all, and they felt the loss just as deeply. Bonner had been one of them, loyal, brave, and unflinchingly committed to their cause. His death wasn't just a personal loss for Marcus, it was a blow to them all. Marcus gently laid Bonner's body down, standing slowly. He looked at his team, his face hard, his resolve stronger than ever. "We honor him by finishing what we started," he said, his voice firm. "Bonner gave his life, so we could keep fighting. And that's exactly what we're going to do." The soldiers nodded, their faces grim but determined. There was no room for hesitation anymore. They had tasted victory, but it had come at a cost. Bonner's death was a reminder of the price they would all pay in this war, but it was also a rallying cry. They wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. As they prepared to leave the battlefield, Bonner's body was carried with care, his sacrifice etched into their hearts. Marcus looked up at the stars, knowing that the fight had only just begun. He had lost a friend, but he had gained a purpose. Bonner's death had cemented his determination to see this through, to liberate the galaxy from the Vacnar's grip, no matter how long it took or how many lives it cost. The human soldiers swore to honor Bonner's memory, vowing to keep his spirit alive in every battle they fought. They would fight for him, for humanity, and for the future they were determined to build, one where no more lives were lost to the Vacnar's tyranny. The Vacnar had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip for centuries. Their dominance was absolute, and no one had dared to challenge them. Until now. When word of the human attack reached the Vacnar High Command, their initial reaction was disbelief. Humans, the species they had believed extinct for so long. It seemed impossible. But as reports of the destroyed outpost confirmed the truth, disbelief quickly turned into rage. The Vacnar leaders, pride-wounded and furious at the audacity of these long-forgotten humans, decided to crush the uprising with overwhelming force. To them, this was nothing more than a minor annoyance, a small band of survivors trying to defy the inevitable. They didn't see the humans as a real threat, just a nuisance that needed to be wiped out before it could spread. Their arrogance hadn't diminished, despite the loss of the outpost. They dispatched their elite fleet, massive warships equipped with the most advanced technology the Vacnar had developed over centuries of dominance. These ships were capable of leveling entire planets, armed with weapons so powerful they could vaporize anything in their path. The Vacnar commanders were confident that this would be the end of the humans, a swift and brutal response to remind the galaxy who was in charge. But once again, the Vacnar underestimated their enemy. The human forces, though small in number, had something the Vacnar couldn't anticipate: strategic brilliance. Marcus and his team knew they couldn't go head-to-head with the Vacnar's massive fleet. They didn't have the firepower, and they didn't have the resources. But what they did have was a deep understanding of the Vacnar's weaknesses. The aliens were powerful, yes, but their size and technological advantage made them slow and over-reliant on brute force. The humans studied the incoming fleet carefully, watching how the massive warships moved, how they communicated, and how they deployed their forces. Marcus, along with his AI companions and top tacticians, quickly formulated a plan. They would turn the Vacanar's size against them, using their own arrogance and overconfidence to exploit the flaws in their seemingly indestructible warships. As the Vacanar fleet descended upon them, expecting an easy victory, the humans began their counterattack. They didn't go for a full frontal assault. That would have been suicide. Instead, they struck from the shadows, using their cloaked ships to slip in and out of the Vacanar's range, targeting weak points in their massive vessels. The Vacanar warships were powerful, but they were slow, their bulk making it difficult for them to react quickly. The humans, nimble and agile, darted through the chaos like wolves picking off a lumbering giant. They struck hard and fast, disabling key systems, communications, engines, and weapons, before retreating just as quickly. The Vacanar were caught off guard. They had never faced an enemy who could outmaneuver them like this. Their commanders grew frustrated, ordering more aggressive attacks, but the humans stayed one step ahead. Marcus and his team knew they couldn't take the Vacanar head-on, but they didn't need to. Their goal was to chip away at the enemy, weakening them bit by bit. The tension in the battle escalated as the Vacanar's frustration grew. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, the humans would slip away, striking from another angle. The Vacanar, so used to crushing their enemies with brute strength, struggled to adapt to the humans' guerrilla tactics. Their massive warships, designed for planetary sieges, were too slow and cumbersome to deal with the small, agile human ships. As the battle dragged on, the humans began to turn the tide. The Vacanar's elite fleet, thought to be invincible, was being systematically dismantled. Their once unshakable confidence was starting to crack. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, were proving to be far more dangerous than the Vacanar had ever imagined. But the humans knew this victory wasn't guaranteed. Every strike had to be precise, every move calculated. One wrong step, and the Vacanar's overwhelming firepower would wipe them out in an instant. The tension mounted as both sides pushed each other to the limit. Marcus, watching the battle unfold, felt the weight of the moment. The Vacanar had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. But Marcus also knew this was just the beginning. The Vacanar wouldn't stop until every last human was dead. This fight wasn't about a single battle. It was about survival. The final battle loomed over the horizon like a storm about to break. The human forces, vastly outnumbered, gathered for what would be their most critical and dangerous mission yet. The Vacanar flagship, a massive fortress in space, hovered ominously ahead, surrounded by the elite remnants of the Vacanar fleet. This was humanity's last stand, a battle not just for survival, but for the future of the entire galaxy. Marcus stood at the helm of his ship, his face set in grim determination. He knew the odds were against them. The Vacanar had overwhelming numbers and firepower, and their leader, Supreme Commander Therak, was known for his ruthlessness. But Marcus also knew that humanity had something the Vacanar could never understand: an unbreakable will to fight, no matter the odds. The plan was daring, almost reckless, but it was their only chance. Marcus would lead a direct assault on the Vacanar flagship, hoping to strike at the heart of their power. Meanwhile, the rest of the human forces would engage the Vacanar fleet, using every trick and tactic they had to keep the enemy occupied. The humans were outgunned, but they had learned how to turn the Vacanar's strength against them. This would be a fight of wits as much as a fight of weapons. As the human ships closed in on the Vacanar fleet, the battle erupted into chaos. Explosions lit up the void of space as the Vacanar's massive warships unleashed torrents of firepower. But the humans were ready. They weaved through the storm of lasers and missiles, using their smaller ships' agility to dodge and strike at key weak points in the Vacanar defenses. It was a battle of David versus Goliath, and the humans were fighting with every ounce of determination they had. Amidst the chaos, Marcus's ship cut through the enemy lines, heading straight for the Vacanar flagship. The towering vessel loomed ahead, bristling with weapons and shields. It seemed impenetrable, but Marcus had a plan. With a series of precise strikes, his team disabled key parts of the flagship's defenses, creating an opening for them to board. The moment Marcus and his team set foot inside the Vacanar flagship, they knew the real battle had begun. The interior was a labyrinth of metal and shadows, with Vacanar soldiers waiting at every corner. The humans fought their way through, using their combat skills and ingenuity to outmaneuver the Vacanar forces. Every step forward felt like a victory, but they were pushing toward one goal: the bridge, where Supreme Commander Therak awaited. Finally, Marcus reached the heart of the flagship. The massive doors to the bridge slid open, revealing Therak standing in the center, his towering form even more intimidating up close. He was a monstrous figure, a blend of organic flesh and cold metal, his body enhanced with cybernetic implants that made him even more dangerous. His glowing red eyes locked onto Marcus, and a low, menacing growl rumbled from his throat. "So the humans dared to challenge me," Therak sneered, his voice filled with disdain. "You are nothing. Your kind is nothing." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the Vacanar leader. "We're more than you think," he said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. Therak roared and charged at Marcus, his cybernetic limbs moving with incredible speed and power. The fight was brutal, a clash of strength and skill. Therak's metal fists slammed into the walls as Marcus dodged, his movements quick and precise. Every punch, every strike was a deadly dance, with Marcus using every bit of his training to stay one step ahead. But Therak was strong, almost too strong. His enhancements made him faster and more powerful than any normal being, and it was all Marcus could do to keep from being overwhelmed. Every time Therak's fist missed by inches, the force alone shook the floor. But Marcus didn't need brute strength. He had something more valuable: his mind. As the fight raged on, Marcus began to notice the patterns in Therak's attacks, the way his cybernetic limbs moved with predictable, mechanical precision. Therak's enhancements, though powerful, made him rigid, unable to adapt quickly. Marcus used that to his advantage, feinting and dodging, slowly wearing Therak down. Finally, Marcus saw his opening. Therak lunged at him, his massive fist crashing toward Marcus's head. But Marcus anticipated the move, stepping aside at the last second. In one swift motion, he grabbed a loose panel from the ship's floor and jammed it into the exposed circuitry of Therak's arm. Sparks flew as the metal limb malfunctioned, and Therak stumbled, his body jerking uncontrollably. Marcus didn't hesitate. With a final, decisive strike, he drove his weapon into Therak's chest, piercing through metal and flesh. Therak let out a guttural roar, his body convulsing as his systems shut down. With one last, hateful glare, he collapsed to the floor, defeated. Marcus stood over Therak's fallen body, breathing heavily. It was over. The Vacanar leader was dead. But the battle wasn't finished yet. Outside, the human forces were still fighting against the Vacanar fleet. The humans, despite being heavily outnumbered, were holding their own, using their clever tactics to keep the Vacanar at bay. And when news of Therak's death spread through the Vacanar ranks, their morale shattered. Without their leader, the Vacanar forces began to crumble. One by one, the Vacanar warships fell, their once mighty fleet reduced to wreckage. The humans, though battered and bloodied, emerged victorious. The galaxy, long terrorized by the Vacanar, was finally free. As Marcus looked out at the stars, he knew that this victory had come at a great cost. Many had died, and there would be more battles ahead. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had a future. They had faced overwhelming evil and emerged victorious, not through sheer force, but through determination, courage, and the unbreakable will to survive. With Therak's defeat echoing through the vacuum of space, the Vacanar Empire began to crumble. News of the fallen commander spread quickly among the Vacanar ranks, sowing confusion and fear. What had once seemed like an invincible force was now a fragmented remnant, unable to hold together without its ruthless leader. Across the galaxy, enslaved species who had long suffered under the Vacanar's tyranny began to rise up. Inspired by the bravery of the humans, they took courage from the newfound hope. All around, planets that had been silenced for years erupted in rebellion. Formerly oppressed species joined forces, overthrowing their Vacanar overseers and reclaiming their freedom. The galaxy was alive with the sound of resistance, a chorus of voices finally standing up against their oppressors. Back on the human flagship, Marcus stood on the bridge, gazing out at the stars. The space that had once seemed so dark and oppressive now shone with the promise of new beginnings. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders, a mix of pride and sorrow. They had faced unimaginable odds and had come out victorious. But the price of freedom was steep. He thought of Bonner, his loyal friend and soldier who had sacrificed everything in the fight against the Vacanar. Marcus had lost many comrades in this battle, each one a reminder of the cost of their hard-won victory. He felt a deep ache in his heart, knowing that they had paid dearly for this moment. As the ship moved through the stars, Marcus made a silent vow. He would honor Bonner's sacrifice and the sacrifices of all those who had fought and died. He would ensure that the galaxy would never again fall into tyranny and despair. They had fought not just for themselves, but for every species that had suffered under the cruel hand of the Vacanar. The fight was far from over. They had opened the door to freedom, but they needed to protect it fiercely. As Marcus stood with his crew, he could feel the spark of unity igniting among the diverse species that had once been enemies or indifferent to each other. They were all bound by the common thread of their struggle for freedom. Together, they would forge a new alliance, one built on mutual respect and shared goals. In the days that followed, Marcus worked tirelessly with the leaders of the liberated species, discussing plans for a brighter future. They envisioned a galaxy where alliances could be formed, where freedom and justice would prevail over oppression. The humans had reclaimed their place, not as conquerors, but as allies, helping others to rebuild their lives after the devastation of the Vacanar rule. As Marcus looked out at the stars again, he knew that the galaxy was forever changed. The battle had brought them all together, and they would stand united against any future threats. There was still much to do, many challenges ahead, but for now, they had won a crucial victory. With renewed determination, Marcus turned away from the stars, ready to lead his people and their new allies into a future of hope and prosperity. The galaxy was free, and together, they would ensure it remained that way. Just when Marcus thought that peace was finally within their grasp, a chilling discovery shook him to his core. While monitoring communications across the galaxy, one of his officers noticed a strange transmission breaking through the static of space. The officer's face paled as he replayed the message, his fingers trembling over the controls. "Sir, you need to see this," the officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. The bridge fell silent as Marcus stepped closer, his heart racing with unease. The transmission was garbled, filled with static and bursts of noise, but one thing was clear. It carried a sense of urgency and danger. As Marcus listened closely, fragments of the message began to emerge, hinting at a new threat lurking beyond the edges of known space. Phrases like unimaginable power and the awakening echoed ominously through the bridge. The officer worked quickly, trying to clean up the signal, but what they managed to extract sent shivers down Marcus's spine. It became evident that this was not just an ordinary communication. It was a warning. A race, unlike any they had encountered before, was on the move. The Vacanar, it seemed, were only the beginning. The message hinted at a darker force, one that had been biding its time, while the galaxy was consumed by conflict. This new enemy appeared to be gathering strength and resources, preparing to strike when humanity and its allies were at their most vulnerable. The air was thick with tension as Marcus exchanged worried glances with his crew. They had just fought tooth and nail for their freedom, and now it seemed that peace was slipping through their fingers. How could they prepare for a threat that they knew nothing about? Just as the gravity of the situation began to sink in, the transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. The crew stood frozen, grappling with the implications of what they had just heard. A sense of urgency filled the air, an understanding that their battle was far from over. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and now they faced a new enemy lurking in the shadows. With a heavy heart, Marcus turned to his crew, determination hardening his features. "We need to prepare," he said firmly. "This is only the beginning." They had fought bravely to reclaim their freedom, but now they would need to be even braver to protect it. As the crew rallied around him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The galaxy was once again at a crossroads, and humanity's next chapter was about to unfold. They had overcome great odds, but now they had to face an even greater challenge. As Marcus looked out into the vastness of space, he felt a mix of fear and resolve. The stars twinkled like distant promises, each one representing a world that could be affected by this new threat. With his mind racing and adrenaline surging, he knew that they had to act fast. The story of humanity was not just one of survival, but of constant vigilance. And as the ship prepared to embark on a new mission, he realized that they would need every ally they could gather. The fight was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. In that moment, a new chapter beckoned, a chapter filled with uncertainty, danger, and the unwavering spirit of humanity, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The galaxy was wide and full of mysteries, and Marcus was determined to face them all, no matter the cost. The adventure was far from over, and a new story was just beginning to unfold.